If you spend enough time staring at a digital audio workstation, you really start to view white noise as just a utility.
Oh, absolutely. It's just a tool.
Right. It's the broadband hiss you use for a synth riser, or, the static you just aggressively filter out of a vocal take. Usually it's just interference.
Yeah, the literal definition of an unwanted artifact. It's the sonic equivalent of a blank sheet of paper, really. But we rarely treat it with that kind of reference.
No, we don't. We usually just sweep a filter over it to build energy before a drop and call it a day.
Exactly.
But when you step into the architecture of modern Afro House and Amapiano, that exact same raw digital static is fundamentally repurposed.
It completely shifts.
It does. It stops being a cheap build-up tool and becomes this deeply complex spiritual language. It becomes the heartbeat of the group. So welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are immersing ourselves in an incredibly fascinating masterclass session. It's from 786 Music's The White Noise Chronicles, specifically episode 04, which is called Noise and the Ancestors.
And it is a phenomenal source.
It really is. Our mission for you today is to explore this profound collision between, cutting-edge digital music production, specifically in Logic Pro 12, and ancient spiritual traditions.
Because we are looking at how Afro House and Amapiano producers use synthesized white noise to replicate really complex West African percussion.
Right. And it's not just a technical tutorial. It's not just someone clicking around Logic. It's a philosophical debate. Is using a synthesizer to recreate an ancestral instrument just like a cheap production trick? Or is it a faithful extension of a spiritual technology?
And that tension is exactly what drives the whole session.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the masterclass is structured around this really intense tension between its two instructors. You have Sarah, who is a cultural storyteller.
Where she brings the history.
Yeah, and then you have James, the technical analyst, and they clash almost immediately.
They really do.
Yeah.
And we have to start with Sarah's opening stance, because instruments like the Shekere, the Axatse, and the agogo, they are not just noisemakers in an acoustic sense.
Right, they're a cultural inheritance.
Exactly. If you analyze the acoustic output of a Shekere, sure, it's technically generating noise. But Sarah argues that treating this as just a synthesis technique really risks flattening a deep spiritual technology into, a mere DJ trick.
Because in Yoruba religious ceremonies, or candomblé in Brazil, this noise is the literal language used to communicate with ancestors.
Yes, the sound is the invocation. It's not incidental. So if you're a producer outside that tradition, just, grabbing a white noise oscillator to make a quick shaker loop, you're stripping away the meaning.
It makes me think of translating an ancient poem into a new language.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Yeah, because you have to understand both the profound cultural context and the precise grammar of the new language. Otherwise, it's just hollow mimicry, right? It might look like the poem, but it has no soul.
Totally. But then James pushes back. And his counter argument is really interesting, because he says that Afro House is already a translation.
Right. West African percussion meeting four-on-the-floor electronic music.
Exactly. Pioneered by South African producers like Black Coffee and Inu Napa. So, to James, understanding the actual physics of the noise in a digital space doesn't diminish the heritage. It actually deepens it.
So they basically reach this resolution where they agree that a producer outside the tradition must understand the cultural function of the noise.
Right. You have to know what the sound is actually doing.
Because the noise isn't just an incidental byproduct. It is the voice.
What's fascinating here is how exactly you build that voice in a piece of software. How do you build an ancient gourd instrument out of raw digital static?
Right, because if you've ever tried to synthesize a shaker using just a noise generator, it usually sounds terrible.
Oh, it's awful. It sounds like a broken air compressor. Just thin and robotic.
But James deconstructs the shaker in Logic Pro 12, and it requires two distinct layers, because mechanically, the physical instrument is a gourd covered in a net of beads.
Right, you have the collision and you have the resonance.
Exactly. So for layer A, the beads, he uses retro synth in analog mode. He generates pure white noise, but then he high-pass filters it at 2500 hertz.
Which is pretty high.
Very high. And he pairs that with a super sharp 5-millisecond release. So he's capturing that bright, sharp click of the hard beads striking.
Right, just the violent microscopic impact. But you need the hollow space, too.
Yeah, so for layer B, which is the gourd, he switches to alchemy. He takes white noise again, but this time he filters it through two parallel bandpass filters.
And those frequencies are super super specific, right?
Yeah, 280 hertz for the fundamental resonance and 840 hertz for the harmonic, and he gives it a much longer 180 millisecond decay.
Which gives it that tonal warmth. He's mathematically simulating a hollow wooden sphere. It's just brilliant.
It really is. I was marveling at this when going through the source. We are essentially recreating the physical anatomy of the instrument in code.
We really are.
But here's the thing. How do you program it so it doesn't sound like a Terminator is playing it? I mean, a perfect 16th note grid ruins the illusion instantly.
Oh, totally. The human element is everything. And James explains that it all comes down to the rhythmic programming. He programs 16th notes, but heavily relies on ghost notes.
Those little in-between hits.
Exactly. And the key is that he deliberately nudges those ghost notes slightly off the grid, like plus or minus 3 milliseconds.
Wow, just that tiny amount.
Yeah, just 3 milliseconds. It mimics the tiny hesitation or acceleration of a human wrist turning the gourd.
That makes so much sense. But then they contrast this with the Axatse, which is an Uinganian gourd rattle.
Right, and the Axatse is played completely differently. You hit it against your hand and your thigh. It's much harsher.
Way harsher. And to get that sound, James uses a very narrow, incredibly bright bandpass filter up at 4,000 hertz.
But the part that really surprised me was how he gets the organic imperfection of the seeds rattling inside.
Oh, the digital dirt.
Yes, he uses a bit crusher plug-in, which, normally you'd use to make something sound like a lo-fi 90s sampler.
Right. It feels almost disrespectful to use digital degradation on a sacred instrument.
It does seem that way at first, but he sets it to 16-bit depth and a 22 kilohertz resolution. And that subtle reduction creates this specific digital grittiness.
It tricks the brain into hearing the chaotic physical friction of hundreds of tiny seeds.
Exactly. And then he links the MIDI velocity to the filter cutoff. So hitting it harder doesn't just make it louder, it makes it physically brighter.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. We've built these physical instruments, right? But as Sarah points out, African percussion isn't just about the objects themselves striking.
Right. It's about the space around them.
Exactly. It's about the atmosphere those sounds inhabit, especially when we cross over into Amapiano.
Amapiano is such a perfect context for this. Those Axatse techniques cross over beautifully with all those heavily syncopated 8th and 16th note subdivisions.
But you can't talk about Amapiano without talking about the log drum.
Oh, the quintessential log drum. That deep, woody bass tone. And James actually builds that out of noise, too.
Wait, really? Because a log drum clearly has a pitch. How do you get a melody out of pure unpitched static?
It's wild. He uses alchemy again, but in granular mode. He takes a really short noise sample, shreds it into microscopic grains, and loops it insanely fast.
Oh, so the speed of the loop creates the pitch.
Precisely. He applies a narrow bandpass filter, say 110 hertz, to get an A2 pitch.
That is so clever.
But the crucial part, and this is somewhat controversial, he runs a vintage electric piano plug-in in parallel.
An electric piano, like a 70s Rhodes.
Yeah, but he tucks it super far back at minus 20 decibels.
But why? Doesn't sneaking a synthesizer keyboard into a traditional log drum kind of defeat the whole purpose of the cultural fidelity they're talking about?
You would think so. But James explains it acts as a phantom tone. Because it's so quiet, your conscious brain never hears a piano. But it implies the pitch without ruining the rough, woody noise character of the drum.
That is, wow, it's an architectural use of sound.
Which perfectly transitions into how they redefine the concept of the drop in Afro House. Or rather, the breakdown.
Right. Because in, standard European techno, a breakdown is all about building massive tension.
The huge snare rolls, the rising sweeps.
Yeah, exactly. Just anxiety building up for a huge drop. But Sarah explains that in Afro House, it's about deepening. It's a going under.
It's a ceremonial space. And James creates this space using a custom spectral noise profile in alchemy.
He boosts the 80 to 200 hertz range for body.
Yep, and 8 to 12 kilohertz for that feeling of moving air. But then he runs it through Space Designer, using an impulse response of an actual African drum room.
So he's literally placing the digital noise inside a real acoustic space.
Exactly. And to make it feel alive, he adds a subtle tremolo, just 10 to 15%. So the noise actually pulses and breathes.
That is just brilliant. And what I love is that the noise sits so low in the mix around minus 24 decibels. So you don't even notice it while the beat is going.
Right. It's just texture.
But then when the kick and the bass are removed for the breakdown, there isn't this empty vacuum. That breathing architectural noise just rises up to fill the void.
It's gorgeous. But, having all these incredible authentic sounds means nothing if you trap them in a rigid digital cage.
Yeah, we have to talk about the philosophy of the grid.
James is very adamant about this. He gives a serious warning about the dangers of over-quantization and over-compression.
Because if you lock these Afro House percussive elements perfectly to the digital grid, you literally destroy them.
You erase the humanity, the timing variations, the dynamic subtleties, the fact that hits land slightly ahead or behind the beat. That is the groove.
I love how James phrases it in the masterclass. He says, the organic quality of noise instruments is not a problem to be solved. It's the signal.
It's the signal. That's such a powerful way to frame it.
So what does this all mean? Like, for you listening right now, even if you aren't a music producer and you've never touched Logic Pro, I think the lesson here is profound.
It really translates to anything.
It does. True fidelity to a tradition, any tradition, isn't about perfectly clean mathematical data. It's about actively preserving the breath, the dirt, and the human variation.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it brings us right back to Sarah's powerful concluding thought.
Right, the whole debate they started with.
Exactly. The producers who make music that truly moves people, they understand that the noise isn't just some incidental byproduct of the material. The noise is the voice.
It's the voice. We started this deep dive looking at white noise as a harsh digital artifact, just a utility.
Something to be filtered out.
Yeah, but we've seen how it is actually the vital material needed to translate ancestral voices from the Shekere to the log drum into modern Afro House.
It completely changes how you hear the music.
It really does. So the next time you hear a club track with that deep, pulsing, shaker-driven groove, just remember you aren't just hearing a computer. You are hearing history in motion.
Beautifully said.
Which leaves me with a final thought for you to ponder today. If electronic noise can be harnessed to preserve the spiritual language of the ancestors, what other unwanted background noise in our daily modern lives might actually contain a profound message we just haven't learned to translate yet? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you.